What if I told you that every time your avoidant partner comes back, they're not coming back to you at all? They're actually trying to resolve a relationship with someone who doesn't even exist anymore, what I call their phantom ex. This ghost from their past lives rent-free in their head, and until they conquer it, they'll keep using real people like you as practice rounds. But here's what makes their logic truly insane. This entire process is driven by their inability to regulate their own emotions. They can't handle the internal chaos of genuine connection, so they create elaborate mental gymnastics to avoid dealing with their feelings. Today, I'm breaking down the exact psychological mechanism that makes avoidance return and why understanding this changes everything about how you should respond. To understand why they always come back, we need to start at the very beginning of their emotional cycle. Your ex isn't acting randomly. They're following a pattern that some relationship experts call the relationship death wheel. This coaching model maps out common stages many dismissive avoidants go through after a breakup, and understanding it helps predict what they might do next. What feels like confusing, irrational behavior actually follows predictable patterns. Most people miss the signs because they focus on the wrong phases. They watch for changes during the breakup itself or immediately after, but the real shifts happen much later in the cycle. For predicting returns, focus on the post-breakup sequence: separation elation, depressive crash, and longing for a phantom version of you. Here's why this pattern emerges in the first place. Avoidant attachment typically develops when caregivers were emotionally distant or discouraged expressions of need during childhood. These adults learn to prioritize independence and self-protection over emotional connection. When relationships trigger their discomfort with closeness, they pull away following familiar coping mechanisms. The early relationship stages set up everything that follows. Initial attraction draws them to someone who seems emotionally available and warm. They experience genuine feelings during this phase, which is why the connection feels so real and intense. But as emotional intimacy increases, what feels normal to you triggers their internal alarm system. They begin creating mental justifications for why the relationship won't work long-term, focusing on minor incompatibilities, or imagining how much better life would be with more freedom. This mental preparation leads to their decision to leave. They've convinced themselves that relationships are suffocating, that they're better off alone, and that leaving was the right choice. This narrative becomes their psychological armor for what comes next. After the breakup, your ex experiences what feels like pure relief. They can make decisions without consulting anyone. They don't have to navigate emotional conversations, and they don't feel responsible for anyone else's feelings. This relief is so intense that it validates their choice to leave. Both you and they believe this feeling will last forever. The relief phase can extend for weeks or months, making it seem like they've moved on completely. During this time, they might appear happier, more social, or completely indifferent to the relationship. This phase convinces them that they've made the right choice and that their life is better without the emotional complications of a relationship. But this relief stage is temporary because it's masking deeper attachment needs rather than eliminating them. The dismissive-avoidant attachment style doesn't disappear after a breakup. It guides them through each phase with recognizable patterns, though the timing varies from person to person. When you understand this pattern, their behavior stops feeling random and starts making psychological sense. You can see that their initial relief isn't a personal rejection of you specifically. It's their attachment system's predictable response to relationship pressure. They're not celebrating your absence as much as they're celebrating the return of their emotional comfort zone. The coaching model suggests that many avoidants follow similar trajectories, though individual experiences vary based on personal history and circumstances. Some might cycle through phases quickly, while others take months. Some might skip certain stages entirely or revisit earlier ones. What matters most is recognizing that their post-breakup behavior follows internal logic, even when it seems contradictory from the outside. They're not trying to hurt you or play games. They're responding to deep-seated patterns that developed long before they met you. But here's what changes everything about their experience. That intense relief they're feeling right now has a hidden expiration date. What your ex is experiencing right now is what relationship experts call separation elation, a psychological phenomenon that feels like pure freedom, but carries the seeds of its own destruction. This pressure valve effect creates such intense relief that it convinces them they made the right choice. But it's actually masking deeper needs rather than eliminating them. When avoidants leave relationships, they experience massive relief that feels like a pressure valve being released. Every emotional obligation, every need to consider your feelings, every moment of relationship anxiety just disappears. They wake up without worrying about your mood. They make plans without checking in with anyone. They can focus entirely on themselves without feeling guilty about it. First-person accounts from avoidant individuals and coaches describe this as an immediate surge of relief and distraction, with many feeling almost untouchable during this phase. This relief works through several powerful mechanisms. They experience freedom from emotional obligations. No more remembering anniversaries. No more emotional support conversations. No more navigating conflict or hurt feelings. They regain what feels like complete independence, able to travel, work late, spend time with friends, or simply exist without considering how their choices affect another person. Their relationship anxiety completely disappears because there's no relationship to worry about anymore. This separation elation phase commonly lasts weeks to months, making it seem permanent to both you and them. During this time, your ex might appear happier than they have in a long time. They might post more on social media, seem more social, or throw themselves into work or hobbies they neglected during the relationship. Friends might comment on how good they seem, which reinforces their belief that leaving was the right decision. The extended duration makes this relief phase incredibly convincing. Unlike a temporary mood boost, separation elation can sustain itself for significant periods because it addresses the avoidant's core fear of emotional suffocation. Every day that passes without relationship stress feels like proof that they're better off alone. They start planning a future that doesn't include the complications of romantic relationships. What your ex doesn't realize is that this relief actually masks their core attachment needs rather than eliminating them. Humans are wired for connection, even dismissive avoidance. The pressure valve effect doesn't change their fundamental need for emotional bonds. It just temporarily numbs their awareness of that need. Think of it like taking pain medication for a broken bone. The pain relief doesn't mean the bone is healed. It just makes the injury temporarily bearable. This artificial high has a psychological expiration date because it's unsustainable. The relief depends on contrast, feeling good because they're no longer dealing with relationship stress. But as time passes, the contrast fades. What once felt like freedom starts feeling like emptiness. The independence that initially felt liberating begins to feel isolating. The absence of emotional obligations transforms into the absence of emotional connection. Understanding this helps you take protective action during this phase. This is the perfect time for emotional detachment and maintaining no contact, which serves as both a protective tool for your healing and allows their psychological cycle to progress naturally. Focus on self-care and rebuilding your own emotional foundation while they work through this predictable stage. The pressure valve eventually stops working when loneliness creeps in. This isn't the same as missing you specifically. It's a deeper recognition that their life lacks meaningful emotional connection. They start noticing couples, feeling envious of friends and relationships, or experiencing moments of profound isolation that independence can't cure. Their happiness after the breakup wasn't proof that you were wrong for them. It was proof that they were following a predictable psychological pattern, But there's a specific window when this relief begins to crack, and the timing is more predictable than you might think. Often around 2 to 4 months after the breakup, something shifts in your ex's emotional state that makes them question everything they thought they knew about leaving you. The separation elation that felt so convincing starts to fade, and what replaces it changes their entire perspective on the breakup. The depressive episode that follows separation elation is a psychological crash that catches most avoidants completely off guard. They expected the relief to continue indefinitely, but instead, they find themselves in an emotional valley that feels nothing like the freedom they celebrated just weeks earlier. This crash isn't something they can avoid or push through with willpower. It's a natural consequence of how their attachment system works. This isn't just sadness or temporary disappointment. What your ex experiences is their earlier narrative starting to crack as attachment needs re-emerge. Everything they told themselves about being better off alone begins to feel questionable. The justifications that made leaving seem logical now feel hollow against this new emotional reality. During this phase, they may seem flat, withdrawn, or suddenly nostalgic. They wake up feeling numb, like they're going through the motions of life without any real purpose or meaning. Simple activities that once brought satisfaction now feel hollow and pointless. They experience profound disconnection from their own life, as if they're watching themselves from the outside without feeling invested in what happens. You might notice them romanticizing the past, or seeming unusually reflective about relationships in general. The confrontation with long-term loneliness becomes unavoidable during this crash. For the first time since the breakup, they truly grasp what it means to be alone indefinitely. This isn't the temporary solitude they enjoyed during the relief phase. It's the recognition that their choices have led them toward a future without meaningful emotional connection. The independence they celebrated now looks like isolation stretching endlessly ahead. This crash happens because their core attachment needs resurface once the relief wears off. The human need for emotional bonding doesn't disappear just because someone has avoidant tendencies. Those needs were simply suppressed by the intense relief of escaping relationship pressure. Now that the pressure valve effect has faded, their attachment system reasserts itself with surprising force. During this vulnerable phase, they start romanticizing what they lost while minimizing the reasons they left. The relationship stress that felt overwhelming just months ago now seems manageable compared to the emptiness they're experiencing. They remember the good moments with vivid clarity, while the conflicts and emotional demands fade into background noise. Your laugh, your support during difficult times, your presence during everyday moments. These memories become more powerful than their fears about emotional suffocation. This depressive phase makes them most vulnerable to reconsidering contact because their usual defenses are weakened. The confidence they felt about leaving you has evaporated, replaced by doubt and regret. They question whether they made a terrible mistake, whether they threw away something valuable out of fear, whether they'll ever find connection again. However, this is still a vulnerable window where they may start to long, but won't necessarily reach out. Avoidants rarely initiate reunions because doing so requires admitting vulnerability and need. Two things their attachment style actively resists. This is why maintaining boundaries during this phase protects both your healing process and prevents you from being drawn back into their emotional confusion before they've done the internal work necessary for real change. The timing of this crash is remarkably consistent because it reflects fundamental patterns in human psychology rather than individual choice. But something even more complex happens during this depressive period that explains why their longing feels so intense yet so conflicted. During this vulnerable state, your ex creates what relationship experts call a phantom ex, an idealized memory version of you that feels completely safe to long for. This psychological contradiction drives the most confusing part of the avoidance return pattern and explains why they reach out exactly when you least expect it. The Phantom X concept reveals how avoidants idealize their former partner by remembering the positive aspects while omitting the emotional demands that originally triggered their departure. During their depressive crash, your ex's mind begins reconstructing who you were in the relationship, but with a crucial difference. They strip away all the elements that triggered their avoidance while keeping everything that made them feel good. This phantom version of you loves them unconditionally, but never asks for emotional intimacy. This version supports them, but never needs support back. This version makes them laugh, but never requires them to process difficult emotions together. This phantom version has all your good qualities, but none of the relationship pressure that scared them away. They remember your warmth without remembering the conversations about commitment. They recall your affection without recalling the moments when you needed reassurance. They cherish memories of your connection while forgetting every time they felt overwhelmed by your emotional needs. The Phantom X exists in a perfect emotional bubble where love flows freely without any of the vulnerability that real relationships require. They can miss this phantom you intensely while still being terrified of the real you, because these are two completely different people in their mind. The Phantom X represents everything they want from a relationship without any of the scary parts. Missing this idealized version feels safe because it's not connected to the actual risk of emotional exposure. They can experience profound longing for the phantom, while simultaneously feeling panic at the thought of real reconciliation with the person who might still want emotional intimacy from them. The psychological safety of longing for someone who seems to have moved on becomes their emotional escape hatch. When they believe you're no longer interested in them, missing you feels manageable. They can indulge in romantic fantasies about what you had together without worrying that these feelings might lead to actual relationship pressure. Your apparent disinterest signals to their avoidance system that it's safe to feel these emotions because there's no immediate threat of having to act on them. First-person experiences reported in background material show that avoidance often returned only when they felt safe and sensed residual goodwill from their ex-partner. They interpret your absence or moving on as proof that reconnecting might be safe now, because they assume you've given up on wanting anything serious from them. If you've stopped reaching out, started dating someone else, or simply seem to be thriving without them, they interpret this as evidence that you no longer pose the emotional threat you once did. This creates the perfect storm for their return, because they experience intense longing without perceived threat. However, avoidants often prefer to admire from afar and may not initiate reunion even when longing intensely. Their silence or small signals like social media likes or brief texts can feel like hope, but often reflect this Phantom X dynamic rather than genuine readiness for change. If you do receive contact, listen for sustained vulnerability and lowered emotional boundaries. Look for signs like increased emotional availability, willingness to discuss past problems openly, or openness to therapy. These indicate movement towards secure attachment rather than phantom-driven contact. If missing you is coupled with no willingness to change or be vulnerable, it's likely phantom-driven. Understanding this pattern helps you recognize whether their return represents genuine growth or just another cycle of the same avoidant behavior you experienced before. When they inevitably reach out again, you'll know exactly what's happening. They're not returning to you. They're returning to the phantom version of you they built in their head, the one who never had needs, never asked for more, never demanded real intimacy. That ghost doesn't exist, and you don't have to audition for their half-hearted attention. Your superpower is seeing the pattern. Once you understand the death wheel, you stop being their practice round and start being your own protector. You can demand love that meets you where you are, not a fantasy, but the real thing. The moment you recognize their cycle, you step out of it. you stop being haunted by their return and become the one who chooses. So, tell me, have you ever spotted this phantom version in your own story? Drop it in the comments. Your insight might be the exact lifeline someone else needs today.